I entered in the Hearthstone Masters Tour Open Qualifier for the Americas region. It was my first experience doing a competition for Hearthstone, and my definitely my first experience doing the Conquest style. I feel like the choices that I made in terms of my decks were optimal. The classes I chose was Warrior, I chose Druid, and I chose Warlock. These were the three most popular classes for the tournament. Um, with the changes, the buffs for the cards that were going for Wild, it meant that a lot of the decks that I used were cards that I hadn't used for a while, or I've never used those decks before. So I was doing practicing before the competition, and I did lose a few legend ranks doing that as well. So I wasn't 100% confident with the decks that I chose in terms of their ability, but I felt like with the meta that was at the previous Open Tour qualifiers, because since this was the last one, it meant that I was able to choose the decks based on what was doing well with the previous competitions as well. That it was those were the optimal decks to choose. My strategy going into it was I was going to ban archetypes that were either aggressive, yeah, the most aggressive of the archetypes, or warlock if it was a snake warlock archetype, because the snake warlock deck is one not only if I had never played before, but it also just completely counters Odin Warrior, because with the Odin Warrior you do generate a lot of armor, but with the armor that you gain, the snake ends up stealing your health, so it doesn't matter how much armor you have. It ultimately just takes away your health, so you don't have an option to be able to deal with it. And then the when I did choose my picks and bans as well, so if I saw a warlock that was a snake warlock, I made sure that that was banned. Otherwise, I chose the one that was the most aggressive, just because Odin Warrior would do fine into it, but I didn't really want to risk it with the Druid, because with Druid, if they get off to a really aggressive start, it means that you aren't able to do too much. So yeah, that was my idea. That was my banning strategy and my ideas that I went into the competition with. So going into round one, I I got the picks that I wanted. So I banned the Warlock, that the Snake Warlock that the opponent was using, and they banned my Druid. So in terms of the matchup, I felt like I was heavily favored, especially if I was able to get the Warlock going into the Warrior. And I did end up getting the Warlock into the Warrior, but unfortunately for me, I'll show you in just a moment that the clip meant that I made a huge misplay. And when I was doing the excavate, I ended up excavating and overdrawing my legendary minion, and that ultimately put me so far behind, because the choice that I made with the deck was it's this turn here, was to make sure that I could get the snakes off quite early. And when I did the Eat the Imp, it ended up drawing cards, and I drew up to, I think it was 9 cards. I didn't wasn't focusing much at the time for it, so it was. I don't really want to make it as an excuse, but when I was playing, it was 3 a.m. my time, so it was very very late, and so it wasn't a great time particularly for me to be playing, especially since I'd only had to short sleep beforehand. So yeah, it wasn't ideal sort of in terms of the time for me, but ultimately I did make a big misplay on this turn here that ultimately ended up costing me the match. Because if I hadn't have had my handful for the legendary minion, it would have meant that this game would have been over basically, because it would be turn 6. I'd be able to have gone with the snake. I could have then used the Saloon Brewmaster. I then could have used the snake again, Saloon Brewmaster, and then the snake again. So it ultimately, I ended up having to try and play an out of that. So it was a very big mistake in that situation. And I did end up getting to a relatively close game. Uh, like I was able to get the snake out in the later turns towards the end of the game, but ultimately with a deck that's if you're playing against an Odin warrior, you don't really want to be trying to wait that long for it. So I ended up drawing the cards that I needed to do the combo. I eventually did get to it, so as you can see with the snake that's there. I put it back into my hand and I played it back down. But since I had to use the Brewmaster onto my mole, it meant that I didn't have an ability to use the imp again. Let me just find the particular spot where it is. So I still have my saloons, but yeah, having to use the first saloon onto this one meant that I couldn't obviously use the snake the extra time because it runs the two brewmasters and two saloons, so you're able to you have two extras that you can use if you need to. But ultimately, the the problem with that is that you only do have two times that you can use that. So it does make it that you're a little bit weaker in terms of the ability or the fight that you're doing for it. So I ended up drawing and playing down the snake. I then got the snake back down and played it again. I did overdraw that brewmaster, so that meant that I couldn't do the combo again anyway. I did need to I did end up getting somewhat close in this match. Like it was it was they had three cards left. It was the last turn, and I was playing against an Odin warrior, so even though I made a massive misplay, this deck was massively favored going into the match, so it was a little bit disappointing losing that. The second game was against a druid, so I did have the warrior in the back, but basically I knew that if I didn't win with the warlock against the druid, it wouldn't really matter because the warrior I feel like is it's a somewhat even matchup that you would have going into this. Like if they didn't draw really well, they wouldn't be able to win. But ultimately, when you go into these sorts of matchups. Like I was also a little bit on tilt as well with the fact that I did lose that warrior game. Like I don't think that I played this set particularly well. Like maybe I was a little bit nervous as well in terms of how I'd go with the matchup. But yeah, I feel like I didn't play this set exceptionally well. There's multiple mistakes that I feel like I made, especially that massive one of the overdraw that if I had a little bit more experience with the deck, I might have done a bit better. But yeah, like overdrawing a card in that sort of situation was a pretty big misplay. In this matchup here, like I am doing relatively decent. They've only got four cards in their hand. They only have the hero power going once, so it's not extremely big. And then they use the cactus construct, so they like the matchup that ended up happening, like it was okay. Like I feel like I could have won this match. I think that I was running a little bit slow because I didn't end up drawing um my snake until a lot later. Like I was waiting for quite a few turns. So at the moment it's turn 7, I still don't have it out. And yeah, like I kept drawing cards that weren't particularly useful for it. Like if I'd drawn the taunt minion, I could have done okay. I would have been able to defend against this because they didn't really do too much for a few turns, and I just kept having to defend and defend. And ultimately, it did mean that I was like, because I have these two endgames in my hand, which are dead cards unless you have the drill fist out, and yeah, it meant that there wasn't really too much that I'd be able to do until obviously I got the snake. But with them starting to get their hand built up, especially with their chrono boosts and their construct pylons coming out, it meant that they were going to get Artanis and they were going to get fully set up. So I wasn't really going to be able to defend against the combo that they had. With the last turn, so since they didn't kill my Drill Fist, it meant that I didn't have an easy way to get the endgames being played, so I had to use the reverberations onto my Drill Fist so I could make it so it would be able to get the Excavate minion out, but I wouldn't be able to use the Excavate minion since I have since I only have the 5 mana left. So I needed to play the two endgames down to make sure that I, had a chance of surviving. But since this one had a reverberation on it, they were quite easily able to use the Artanis to be able to take me out that they had. So like I feel like if I had this a lot earlier in the game, it would have been okay because I would have been able to use the snake. But They also had a relatively slow start as well, so I can't really complain about that. So ultimately, at this game, I am 0-1, so it was a little bit disappointing. I feel like the gameplay that I did wasn't exceptional as well, so there was quite a few mistakes, especially in that first game that I really should have won, that ultimately cost me this round. Um, yeah, but you learn. So it is the conquest meta. So like felt like the picks that I had was quite good, and I wasn't really too concerned. Like because it was the first time that I've been playing in one of these sort of tournaments. I really just wanted to wait and see how I went. Going into the second round, I was playing against an opponent that was using Priest, Warlock, and Druid. So the Warlock archetype they ended up using once again was the Snake Warlock. So with the decks that I have, I didn't particularly want to play against that. They ended up having Priest and Druid as their classes that they ended up having for this game. So I ended up choosing Odin Warrior just because it has a relatively decent matchup into both of them. The Warlock, I felt like they'd use the Druid first because with the Priest it is a little bit slower, and I don't think they'd want to. I think they'd want a high roll, especially against the archetypes that I had, the Warlock and the Warrior, because if they did use the priest class and they ended up going relatively slow, both of my archetypes would end up steamrolling over them. So I think that they wanted to get the druid done quickly, just to try and get an advantage against me early on. So going into this match, I ended up choosing the warrior because with the choices they have of either druid or priest, I did feel like the druid was going to get played first, so I ended up choosing this matchup well as well. The idea behind my deck, so since the Odin has been nerfed down to 8 mana, it means that you're able to get it off earlier. It means that, and then there's also the Craftsman's Hammers also had its armor increased. The Sanitizer's been reduced down in mana, so like the deck was extremely strong for this metagame, which is probably the reason why a lot of people did bring the warrior class, and I think Odin Warrior was the most played deck because it was the third most played class, but it was the most played deck because I don't think there was any other warriors being played. That because with the hydration station nerf, I don't think that really ended up being played. And Reno, when I did initial testing, it didn't really feel like it was going to perform that well, especially with how quick the meta is at the moment, which was interesting because I was thinking that Reno, with the brand going down to 6 and Reno going to 8, it would be decent. But with the Reno not being able to clear the board and keep it with just the one space, it does mean that the archetype in general is a lot weaker than what it was. So they ended up getting a relatively decent start with what they need. So they've got the Groovy Cat, they've got the Dragon out. I still don't have my Odin just yet. I did end up getting the snapshot back out, so I was able to get a few copies of other cards. So I did have a few sanitizers available as well. I used the Garish's gift to be able to use shield block, so that's in general going to be the way that I use the Garish's gift to try and draw extra cards and get the extra armor and things like that. I played down the rock stars just to be able to generate a bit more armor because I was a bit concerned they were going to do a Leroy combo onto me. They end up using the Cheer Drake. They got their setting of the sun, so it meant that they were able to hear or deal with my board that was here as well, which was a little bit unfortunate. And I ended up getting the Wind Fury one, the 10 mana Wind Fury one, and also gaining armor. So it meant that I could deal quite a lot of damage coming from hand, and I could heal up quite a lot of the damage that I was dealing too. So what I ended up doing in this match, especially since I did see that they had 6 cards in their deck, I ended up just using my weapon to just outvalue them because with the amount of bursts that they have, they in general aren't going to be able to deal more than 40 damage, even if they have the 2 Groovy Cats and things like that. So I just made sure that I was clearing the board and keeping it as clear as I could, while also making sure my health total was above that, 30, 40 mark. So I ended up using the Ceaseless Expanse. I used the Ignis to be able to get me another weapon. Luckily, again, I got the Wind Fury one. I didn't end up getting the Armor Gain again this time, so it will be a little bit of a weaker weapon if I need it to. But yeah, like I was in a relatively good position in this match since they didn't like I ended up surviving their burst. I've got plenty of armor, and then they couldn't really do too much. Like I ended up just weathering the storm of their cards, and then they end up just being overrun by me, and they just concede. Okay, so this match here that I'm playing, I had just beaten the warrior, and I was feeling relatively happy with my position. Like I felt like Warlock would do relatively well. I had the Drill Fist in my hand, so I was quite happy having that card as the mulligan. They they did get off to a relatively strong start with their Groovy Cat. They also got the Sing Along Buddy with their Cactus Construct, so they also were going quite hot in this matchup as well. I ended up just trading the rush and make sure that I was just dealing with the sing along buddy because I didn't really want them to be able to get extra buffs down into their board. They like their hand they ended up getting, as I mentioned just before, quite a decent start for making the hero power druid work because like as you can see in their hand they had a chrono boost, they had their second groovy cut out early, and my hand was decent as well. Like I can't really complain about what I had. Like I was able to get the excavates off early. I was able to get what I needed to be able to use the um get the snake out. I used this just to be able to get me some extra cards. The reverberations would be relatively decent this match. The minor meant that I was able to get a turn 5 snake. So yeah, it was a pretty good start for me as well. They ended up getting their chrono boost. They got their X groovy cut out, and then they obviously got a bunch of armor and attack that's going down. So like I did play the snake down. I then bounced it back to my hand. So I was sitting relatively decent. Like I was pretty happy with how I was going. I used the reverberations on the 3/4 just so I could do some clearing to try and defend my health total. Um, yeah, and then I ended up using the miner to trade into there since it had the reverberations effect. So I think this was also a game where I made a pretty big blunder. Like I once again haven't been playing these sorts of archetypes very much, so I made a big mistake with the defile and the table flip because in my tired state that I had, I ended up using the defile thinking that it was a blade storm, and then I wanted to use the table flip afterwards. So ultimately, it ended up meaning that I couldn't really deal with what was going on for them anyway. I did know that they also had the sing along buddy in their hand, so it wasn't particularly great for me as well. But as you can see with that defile play, it meant that I didn't clear the board properly. So like if I go back to that turn, let's just quickly go back to it. So with that turn, I had the table flip. It was going to go up to it was going to be on 3 mana, and then the collapse also was going to be on 3 mana. So I'd be able to clear most of these except the zealot. The other one that I could have done was I could have done the table flip, then the defile. It would have put this to 2, this to 1. Then that would have gone to 3. So it wouldn't have cleared completely, but it would have meant that they would have only had 1 minion on the board rather than the 2. So yeah, they ended up getting a relatively decent sort of position from that anyway. And then with but I was up to 23 health anyway. So with the sing along buddy, actually, it didn't end up mattering by looks of it. Yeah, it didn't end up mattering because they would have been able to deal the 23 anyway, coming from those two. So although it was a pretty big misplay, like I realize now that it didn't really save me. So they did have they had what they needed to, and they were able to go on curve, which in general that's how hero power druid wins. So yeah, I'm not too unhappy about that. Like I feel like that was a big mistake for me, but it is what that archetype does. Like it does high roll sometimes, and it just is what it is for it. Okay, so I'm playing against Priest this time. I do feel like that I have a decent sort of matchup going into it because unless they like if I end up getting all my cards off that I need to, and I get the snake relatively early, I will be able to sit relatively pretty. I believe this is the match that I didn't get the snake off till later. Like I did get the drill fist off on turn 4, but a lot of my cards that I have, I just don't end up drawing into what I need to. So it's turn 5 now. I didn't get anything. I did get the excavates here, so it's turn 6. They do have the sentry that's here, so it's not particularly great for me. They are obviously getting a bigger and bigger board. I think that I get to the 3 mana, the epic of the excavated cards, but I think I'm just a little bit off what I need to be. So yeah, I did get the snake turn 6, so I was sitting okay. I only had one of the brewmasters, so I wasn't able to do the complete combo because I needed two of them to be able to take out. So I used the first one and then I brought it back into my hand, and I potentially should have used the drill fist that turn, but just to get more defended against the board that they had. The centuries are fine. Yeah, it was they were starting to run low on health, so I was thinking that I'd be able to take them out using these guys and then be able to use the snake to take out the last 10. But they did also obviously have the lifesteal that are here, so it did make it into a bit of a difficult position. They also, with the Artanis they played down, they had gotten it through this Soothe Fancy, so they ended up getting the second Artanis down as well. I ended up, yeah, once again, I didn't end up drawing what I needed to for the the Youthful Brewmaster or the Saloon, so I'm down to 14 cards. So I once again was just waiting to be able to draw into one of those cards that I needed, because with the hand that they had, because I knew a few of their cards, Protoss minions and the Artanis, that I was in a relatively decent position still. If I had been able to get the Brewmaster off in the next turn or two, I would have been sitting fine, because they wouldn't have been like, they could have traded into me like they did, but it ultimately meant that I would have been able to just go Snake, Brewmaster, and the next turn take them out, and I still would have had a bunch of other resources available to be able to survive the turn that they had. So I ended up drawing into this Eat the Imp, so I needed to make sure that I was drawing into those cards that I had, because ultimately the only real way that I'd be able to survive would be getting the snake. I did get the Brewmaster one, but I needed to use the reverberations to make sure that I could clear most of the board, or clear some of the board that was here. But since they had so much damage there anyway, I wasn't really in a position that I'd be able to deal with what they had, so they ended up just being able to take the win. It was a little bit unfortunate. I feel like that match, my draws definitely let me down. I feel like if I had another Brewmaster, it would have obviously been game over, and I was quite focused on that. I think I may have narrow visioned on that. So it potentially was would have I potentially could have done a few extra different plays to counter that. So at this point in time, I am 0-2, so I was a little bit disappointed with how I was going, but I just wanted to obviously see how I went. Yeah, so this is when I'm 1-2, because the opponent that I ended up playing against didn't end up showing up for their game, so I ended up just getting the free win. I think that the competition, I wasn't sure about this at the time, was that only people that had one loss or zero losses would make it onto the top cut. So there were people that were leaving just before that. So in this matchup, I was playing Druid against Warrior. So with the Druid that I was playing, it was a bit more of a control-y sort of version. I was using the Shattered Reflections to be able to use onto my Titan, and then when I use it onto the Titan, obviously it meant an extra Titan got into my deck, another one got into my hand, so I was able to go Titan, the mana, the mana power, Shattered Reflections onto it. Then I could use the second part, so it more than likely was going to be the drawing card. So it was quite a strong combo. It also meant that you had two Titans plus two 5/5s going onto the board, plus drawing all the cards that you needed to. So I did like the combo that was coming from that. The I was using the dragon package for the Splish Splash Whelps. At this point in time, I am sitting relatively well with my hero power. They're not in a particularly strong position. I do obviously have the Groovy Cat that's on the board as well to be able to get more resourced up. I did end up just dealing with their dealing with them that's there. I ended up getting a few of my excavated cards. I didn't realize that you couldn't, once again with the excavate archetypes, I didn't play then. Like, it was a bit of the time that I was off, and I didn't realize Druid didn't have a excavate legendary minion, or at least I didn't draw one, which was I was a bit surprised by. I ended up getting obviously the mole that's here and things like that. The They end up using their safety goggles, and then they're just dealing face damage. But since I have the armor that's here, it does mean that I'm sitting relatively well. With the Divine Shield, it means that you're relatively safe. So I just traded into here. I then got the extra buff going onto my hero. I obviously did the heal card that was here, and I think that I was able to just use the Ziliacs to be able to clear their board, and there wasn't really too much else that they could do. So like I was able to heal up my health total again, put the Divine Shield down, and then be able to deal quite a lot of damage to them. They just play down their acolyte and then they get some extra cards. But at this point in time, they only have the 2 cards in their hand. Even if they heal up, I do have quite a lot of damage coming from hand to be able to take them out. Like there isn't enough cards in their deck to be able to survive. Like the only thing they could really do is if they were using if they ended up drawing into the Fizzle Snapshot, which was something that I was thinking about. But with the Sing-Along Buddy top deck that I had, it was enough damage to be able to just deal lethal to them with all the cards that I have on the field. And they end up just losing from there. The next game that I played was an Odin Mirror. So it was in this sort of matchup, like you do want to make sure that you're keeping your health total as much as you can above 30, because if they end up getting the Wind Fury weapon, it is a relatively problematic situation for you. You wanted to also make sure that the Odin, you get that as early as possible and you play it down on turn 8. That's the preferred way. So what I was doing for this game was I kept the coin, so on turn 7 I'd just be able to get the Odin down onto the field. It meant that I was able to start swinging earlier. As you can see, they did have the Craftsman's Hammer, so they ended up having 2 of them. So it meant that they were able to get quite a lot of armor up onto their board, and I was sitting on a much lower health total than them. So I needed to do some strategies here to get it so I could start dealing with them. So I ended up using my 2 rock stars just then. Like it potentially would have been better using that later to be able to deal with them, but ultimately, like it probably would have been better using it later on in the game, but it meant that I was able to get some armor and things like that established early, just in case they did have a particularly strong combo against me that they could use. As you can see, they drew onto their Eternal Flame that turn, which was a little bit challenging for me since they were able to get the Fizzle. With the Fizzle, it meant that they were able to obviously get 2 of the weapons in this game, which puts me significantly on the back foot. So once we get to the later turns, as you can see, I end up falling a little bit behind. Like they should have, in that situation, chose the 10 mana weapon. I don't know why they chose the 5. I am sitting with a decent amount of armor on myself, while they've got less armor and things. So like I am sitting in this position decently. Luckily for me as well, I think this Rune Axe didn't have Wind Fury, so they weren't able to deal as much damage to me. It has life steal. Actually, yeah, it has life steal and it has armor gain as well. So like I am sitting in a decent position for these. I do need to make sure that I get rid of the Rockstar. I use the Ignis to be able to get me a weapon as well, and I just chose the 5 mana one because with the current board state, I needed to make sure that I'd be able to get that equipped and ready to go. Like it potentially was a mistake. Like I feel like I could have got away with using the 10 mana one, but the opponent was using a Viper in their deck, so I didn't particularly want to risk it just in case they were able to destroy my weapon, because if they did, it would have meant that I would have been significantly behind, especially having spent 10 mana on it that turn. If it was the weapon that gave Wind Fury and 8 armor, it would have been okay, I guess, but I didn't particularly want to risk it just in case for that sort of situation. So they end up using their shield block. They get, once again, some more armor. I deal with their board, get some more armor as well. At this point in time, it's about making sure my health total is reasonable enough. A mistake that I feel like this was a mistake in this sort of situation. I'll just show you where it is. They're down to 1 card. I've got 6, so at the moment they're significantly further in front in fatigue. I ended up with the hand I've got, it is quite weak, so I did want to draw some extra cards with the Acolyte. Like I feel like I probably shouldn't have done that, because with using the Acolyte there, it meant that because I also knew they did have a Blade Storm in their hand because of the because of the fizzle they had done. So like the fizzle was showing to me that they did have the Blade Fury. So it meant that I ended up drawing most of my deck from the Acolyte, which did put me a little bit closer for the fatigue sort of match. And with the shield blocks and things like that, they aren't actually useful now because this card I have to play down before I have armor, so it's not too much of an issue. I do need to make sure the board's cleared, so I just make sure that I clear it as best as I can. I just get the armor and then swing into them. The the totem also wouldn't have been much of a use for me either. I use the shield slam to clear the Viper because keeping the Blade Storm is going to be better for me as well because I do know that once again they have the Ceaseless in their hand. And now with the fatigue, they're taking one fatigue, and then I'll be taking one fatigue as well. So at the moment in the fatigue battle, we're relatively even. So we do end up just doing a trading backwards and forwards. I get rid of the Ceaseless Expanse to make sure it's cleared, and then I end up I end up just doing 2 damage. So we just take it in turns for the fatigue turns. So they do an armor up and hit me. I do an armor up and hit them. And then once it gets to the point where I'm able to get the lethal damage, I use the shield block. Obviously, it deals more fatigue damage to me. I use the concussive shells, then I also use the Garish's Gift to do the shield block, and then it ends up being able to deal enough damage with the fatigue that they have, and then that's the game for it. So I don't know what those cards were on their hand, but more than likely what was going to be some armor cards that they potentially could have used to be able to take me out. But yeah, I ended up winning due to the fatigue that was there. They ended up being ready, and then I think that they ended up having an issue and they ended up having to go. So we ultimately didn't end up getting to play that game. I ended up getting the win, obviously, because they weren't available. And once again, this person didn't end up showing up for the match. So I think that this was towards the end of the time. So since they had already lost their 2 games, I think they ended up wanting to drop, or they ended up dropping, or because some people they didn't respond when they were dropping, so it meant that there was sometimes where you didn't have anyone showing up for their games. So I think quite a lot of people did drop once they ended up having the 2 losses. So it's possible this person ended up having 2 losses, then leaving anyway. So at this point in time, I am 4-2. Going into my last round, I'm playing against a Druid, Mage, and Warrior. And since I didn't play very much against Mage, I didn't particularly want to risk versing it. I didn't particularly know what the ideal lines and things like that were for it. I knew the lines for Druid and I knew the lines for Warrior, but for Mage I didn't particularly know, especially since it wasn't very popular in the tournament and it hasn't been very popular on ladder. So they ended up banning my Warrior, which I'm fine with. Like, I didn't particularly worry too much. What I did want to make sure though was that I ended up getting Warlock picked into their Warrior. And a lot of the times that people were choosing, they were choosing Warrior first in their matches. So I ended up using my Warlock into their Warrior. And with I thought that would be the way that it would be, and ultimately ended up being the correct pick for me. So with the match that we ended up playing, so I did obviously have a decent start. Like, I had my Vendor and I had my other one drop as well, and then my Miner. So it meant that I was sitting relatively well with what I needed. I did have the cards that I needed to. They also were using a slower version of the Warrior build as well, so it meant that I did have plenty of time to be able to deal with whatever they sent out. I did also draw into my Drill Fist ready for the next turn as well, and with the miner that I had and also the stack, it meant that I was sitting pretty close on being able to have the snake out, and with the snake, obviously, it ends up just winning the game as soon as you get it out. As soon as you can get the combo off onto them, because they're not really fast enough, these warrior decks, to be able to deal with it. The only thing that I really needed to play around was a bomb boss early, so I did make sure that I kept and yeah, there wasn't any dirty rat in that deck. I did make sure that actually I think there was one in ETC, but since I hadn't seen an ETC just yet, I wasn't particularly concerned just yet, and I was keeping my hand relatively large of minions just to make sure that I could play around the ETC if I needed to. The Drill Fist also and was quite good here as well, just being able to apply that more of that pressure against them, and I did have quite a few minions that were here too. What I when they played down their Grifter, I was just making. I'm glad they didn't get the one that takes control of an enemy minion, because otherwise I'd need to think of how I'd be playing around with the Drill Fist. Luckily, it was just the Amulet of Critters, so I wasn't too concerned. I also did learn from my mistake before with the Eat the Imp to be for the Excavate, so I did clear using my other 1 mana spell, the 3 mana Excavated Treasure, to get out my 5 drop. I chose this one because I wanted to once again apply pressure. It's a relatively sticky minion, um, for what they potentially could have, and quite often with Warrior they can only generally do 1 clear per turn. So I thought that would be the easiest way to apply pressure towards them. So I end up getting the end game, which meant that I do have the Excavate ready. Like I can use the Excavate if I need to. I use the 2 mana Excavated Treasure that I have as well, and I do end up trading into their minions as well. So like it is quite a decent sort of position to be in. I didn't want to use the Eat the Imp on my 4/5 just because once they did clear it, it would end up getting me the extra snake. But if I had used it, it would have meant that my hand would have been like I would have been a bit slower on my hand as well. So I play down the snake. I use the Brewmaster on it. It gets me the extra health. It also deals with them a bit. Once again, they aren't really posing too much of a threat towards me, so I am just needing to make sure that I am getting my Brewmaster ready to go. So I use the Eat Them to be able to draw some more cards, and I'm once again hoping for like the Brewmaster and things like that. I do take that turn off because I can't use the snake safely. They play down their their Ziliax, the twin module one, and it does trade into me and things, so they do end up getting back up to their 20 health. Since I generated the cards, I wasn't too concerned about what would happen. Um, because like once I got the snake plus the Brewmaster anyway, I'd be relatively safe. So the only thing that could counter me at this point in time for the next turn win is if they played down the Bomb Boss and it ended up hitting my snake. So I just made sure that I had as many cards as possible in my hand. I also made sure that I kept the minions as well to reduce down the likelihood of them using a Dirty Rat into me too. So I was in a good position. I didn't really worry too much about clearing the board because they wouldn't be able to get enough health back anyway. And then it goes into my turn and I play the snake down and just win the game. So like, yeah, it did play to my strategy correctly, and I knew that going into this tournament that I wanted to have Warlock simply because of how good its matchup is into Warrior. And the last match I played was I played my Druid into their Warrior. So I was using the Dragon Druid build. The Whelp, with the buff that it ended up having to go back down to 2 mana, has made it very, very powerful. I didn't play down the 1-drop that turn because I didn't have another dragon in my deck, in my hand, and I didn't particularly want to risk it because gaining the extra mana is more important to me in this matchup than just having a 3/2 down on the board. They end up getting their Gorgonzormu out. I'm currently sitting on 6 mana because I was able to use New Heights last turn as well. It means that I'm applying quite a lot of pressure towards them. The problem with this hand at the moment is these Shattered Reflections, they are decent, but only when you do have a few cards to be able to use with them. At the moment with my hand it is relatively dead, like it's not really doing too much. Luckily I drew onto a Groovy Cat, so I did use the Shattered Reflections on the totem. I could have used it on the Groovy Cat if I needed to, but I did want to draw some more cards because if I wasn't getting the Chrono Boost and things like that ready, I would be in a bit of a problem. I needed to make sure that I was getting more cards for this hand because it was relatively weak. Luckily for me, I did draw into a Chrono Boost, so with the Construct Pylons, I do have a decent turn going into next turn. I also do obviously have the Groovy Cat, and I can use Shattered Reflections on the Groovy Cat if I need to as well. I end up drawing into a second dragon, so I was able to play that down for free. It could get me a little bit more tempo onto the board, and I drew onto another Chrono Boost as well. So I get that played down so I can get the Artanis ready. It means that I'm drawing the extra card. I've also got a bit of pressure to apply onto the board, and then I just deal all the damage to face, because with Hero Power Druid in general, you're wanting to be sending most of your damage into them. You don't want to be using the damage very often to trade into other minions, because you'll generally find that they'll want to do the trades, or they'll end up doing the trades for you. So it essentially becomes a pseudo taunt on these zealots and things. So they end up sending their minions around. They then use the invader to be able to clear most of the board or clear all of my board, which I'm not too concerned about. So I've got obviously the Groovy Cat buff, and I've also got the Artanis that I can play down if I need to as well. The difference for this deck compared to other hero power decks is it wasn't running Leroy, so I didn't have that big burst damage coming out of my hand, which I was a little bit concerned about. So what I did here was I played the Groovy Cat, then used the Shattered Reflections onto it. It gets me an extra 3 damage that I'm able to apply to them in future turns. So it was important, like I felt like it would be relatively important going into the match for it. Being able to apply the extra 8, being able to do 8 damage to face obviously would be quite strong. Yeah, because when I get these Groovy Cats to die, obviously, they end up getting the not too many taunts. They do have the Forging, which I'm able to just trade completely into, luckily. I also do have the Life Binder, which was a little bit disappointing. Like, I was hoping to be able to use the Shadow Reflections onto it, but ultimately, like, more than likely was better using it for the Groovy Cat, because if they had used a board clear on me, for example, it would have meant that I couldn't do that. But yeah, I ended up being able to deal enough damage, obviously, with the extra buff from the Groovy Cat and then the face damage that was there. So yeah, it was with my hand. As soon as I was able to get that first chrono boost, I was sitting in a relatively strong position, especially since it was still relatively early in the game. They weren't able to get enough cards played down onto their field. But yeah, ultimately I ended up this in this competition 5-2. All games played, it ended up being 3-2, I think, which is fine. Like, I was a little bit disappointed with my initial plays in the first part of the competition. Once again, it could have been nerves, it could have been yeah, it could have been a bit of nerves, it could have been a bit of tiredness and things like that, but I felt like I did turn around towards the end. Like, I had developed a stronger understanding of how the metagame was being played, how the decks were being used, how to use my particular decks as well. And I think in the next tournament, I think I'll do better, just simply because I'll have more experience. I'll actually have played the decks before. Like, when Odin Warrior was really strong, I wasn't playing. When the Snake Warlock deck was really strong, I wasn't playing. So like I had a small understanding of what these or how to play these decks, and I did do a little bit of testing beforehand, but ultimately the decks that I was using were decks that I didn't have a significant understanding of. It was more of a shadow sort of understanding, but I felt like I made the correct picks of decks for the day. I felt like those three classes that I had really worked together well. I also had a strong understanding of what my ban strategy was, which I was very happy about. The tournament was well run. In general, the rounds only took about an hour. Once a round had finished, once everyone had finished the round, in general, they started straight away, so it was going through quite quickly. The only thing that I think this was other people rather than me, but I think that was a little bit disappointing for it was there was only the 256 players available with the registration, and I think that also comes back to how the structure is. So like if there was an extra if there was extra people that were able to play, it would have meant that people that were 6-1, if they are doing a top 16, they wouldn't have made it in. So with the 256 players, it did mean there was the guarantee, unless you're 6-1 or higher, so 7-0, you wouldn't make it in, which is nice. Like, I feel like in any card game, because I also do play Pokemon as well, if there's a cut and your resistance or the wins and losses of your opponents determine how you place, it doesn't really sit properly with me. Just simply because if you were able to choose which opponent you had, it would be fine. But in round one and round two, you don't know how those opponents are going to go. So in round one, they're 0-0 as well. They could potentially lose the rest of their games, and your win-loss resistance goes down. In round two, the same thing. They've sacked their first game, and then they lose the rest of them. And it's similar for all the other sorts of styles for it. So since you can't choose exactly who your opponent is, I feel like, and I did like it about for the competition, that if your opponent is if you're 6-1, you make it through. Or I prefer obviously it was 5-2, but there were a lot of 5-2 players. I think I ended up finishing the competition around 40th or something like that, which I'm happy with. Like I think the 5-2s went up to 17th place. So ultimately, like I tied with people who were 17th place, and it was my first competition. So in terms of next time, I hope that there's more players available, or it's separated into two competitions maybe, just to allow the extra availability for people to play. So there was 836 players registered for this competition, and with 256 cutoff, that's less than half. That's a third, and or less than a third. It'd be about 27 or 28%. There was a lot of people that didn't get to make it, unfortunately, and but it was put into the rules. It did say that there would be 256 players, and I think that was simply so they could guarantee the asymmetrical cut. Sorry, they could guarantee the cut being just the 16 players that were 6-1 or higher. So that was good. I feel like if you were 6-1 and you were 17th place, you'd feel so dodgy because you've missed just because of those sort of simple things. So like, it definitely was a positive in terms of that experience. For the next competition, I'm hoping that I obviously do better in those first couple of games. It, it was it, there were a bit of nerves, probably a bit of tiredness, but ultimately I feel like my gameplay did improve throughout the rest of the competition. I did make some very clear mistakes, which is obviously a learning experience. Like you, you've got to remember that you develop over time, and you obviously get better as well. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this video and this report of how I went in this first tournament that I've done. It was fun. I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed being able to participate against a bunch of other players.